On Monday, October 11th, the couple arrived by train in Berlin at a station festooned with alternating Union Jacks and swastikas. Can you imagine? Just think about the visual. The Union Jack next to a swastika, and the Union Jack next to a swastika, and the Union Jack next to a swastika. Like, are you offended at that imagery? Like, I feel, I'm not even British, and I can't even imagine how, like, deeply offended I would be to see my flag next to a swastika. But anyway, you didn't put any damper on David's attitude about the whole thing. They come rip-roaring in. To meet them was this guy named Robert Ley, who was the head of the National Labor Front. You guys, Robert Ley is such a hot mess this whole chapter. Like the fact that they were like, okay, who are we going to get to show you these guys around? Okay, let's get the alcoholics, show them around. I mean, whatever. You know, just so long as they've got somebody to kind of, you know, keep slight track of them, he's available. I mean, it's super embarrassing. Robert Ley was like a known alcoholic, a total mess. He drank schnapps all day long. He was just off the rails. In fact, halfway through the trip, he was dismissed because even the Nazis were like, all right, it's getting kind of embarrassing that this guy's the one showing around. All right, we'll find somebody else. But okay. That's who they get to ferry them around. It's not like Robert Ley showed himself to be a hot mess for the first time on this trip. Like it was well established that he was just all over the place, never with it, always drinking, always drunk, just totally unreliable. All right, so he shows up. He's going to be, you know, ferrying them about. Then, of course, they've got their old pal Ribbentrop there. Representing Britain was a lowly third secretary, Geoffrey Harrison. The actual British ambassador had stepped out diplomatically to sort of not be in the mix. For all the protestations that this was a private fact-finding visit, it quickly became clear that there were other agendas quite apart from the Nazi propaganda. This is very interesting. Okay, so the Windsors had been assigned two servants by the names of Rudolph and Margot. Rudolph and Margot are not just there to help them out. Rudolph and Margot, as it turned out, were spies for the Nazis. And they were pawing through the luggage trying to find various, I don't know, bits of information about David and Wallace Simpson. Unbeknownst to old Margot and Rudolph, the protection officer who had actually been assigned to the Windsors by the name of Philip Atfield could speak both French and German. So he understood exactly what was going on with these jokers who'd been assigned. So he was picking up all kinds of information from the servants, and he gathered immediately that they were not just there to help out, that they were there trying to gather information for their side. So he was gathering information on them at the same time. Also, he was reporting back to British intelligence on visits to locations wherever he was to let the British know what the Nazis were up to. Now, okay, you guys, it's not like the Nazis took them to go see anything that was of any actual value. Everything that they showed them, it was so much propaganda. It was like, and honestly, it sounds incredibly boring. It's like the most boring trip you've ever heard about. So I know Atfield was trying to be helpful by sending his little reports back, but I can't imagine that he really saw anything, although they did get to go into a rocket research station, so maybe he saw a thing or two. But nothing that they would have been too afraid for Britain to find out. You know, I mean, nobody is showing any kind of actual weaponry that was under lock and key. All right, so there's spies everywhere. They're going to the most boring places. Listen to this. The Windsors' first visit was the Stock Machine Works at Grunwald, an ultra-modern building for 3,000 workers with extensive gardens, a swimming pool, and a restaurant. Oh, ooh la la. I mean, can't wait to write home about my exciting visit to the Stock Machine Works. All right, well, they go and they see that place. They eat at the canteen. Lucky, lucky. And then they enjoyed a concert given for 1,000 workers by the Berlin Labor Front Orchestra with selection from Liszt and Wagner. Okay, let's just wonder for a minute. Are the poor workers being given a concert all the time? Or is this, and this is what I would assume, some kind of little shindig that's been cooked up for the visit of the Windsors? Do you know what I mean? Like, nobody is stopping work at the stock market machine company to be like, all right, everybody, gather around. Let's have the orchestra play a little Wagner. I mean, I think things like this are just so annoying to me because it's like, obviously, this is for my benefit. Like, if I were David and Wallace Simpson, I'd be like, this is nice, but like, if I'm really here on a genuine fact-finding mission, I can guarantee you that it's not like daily lunch break orchestra time, you know? So what is even the point here? I'm trying to find out how to help the poor working class. I came here for ideas. Surely this isn't how you usually do things, as nice as this may be. All right. So then they continue on with this grim tour. The next day, there was a visit to the headquarters of the National Socialist Welfare Organization and then to the Electric Bulb Company. You know, try not to get too excited. It's all just so thrilling. They got to see a lot of garden settlements for working men. And then after, you know, traipsing around looking at all the gardens and the electric bulbs, they went over to Lay's 37-room house in the Grunwald, and attending the dinner was Ribbentrop, Hess, Himmler, and Goebbels. Okay, so quite a crew. Now, the visit appeared to confirm many of the German assumptions about the former king. Now, Goebbels wrote in his diary rather flattering remarks about the king. I think he was really overly generous in his statements. Goebbels said, "The Duke is wonderful, a nice, sympathetic figure who is open and clear and with a healthy understanding of people." Was he talking to the same person we've been talking to? Anyway, he went on to say that it's a shame that he's no longer king. With him, we could have entered into an alliance. Yeah, I'm sure you could have. But I mean, like, what is this foolishness? He's got a healthy understanding of people. Not when he was staying with Kitty Rothschild and couldn't even be summoned out of bed to say goodbye or thank you or tip her servants or even give her a Christmas present. I'm not sure who he met that night, but it certainly isn't the Duke we know. Okay, well, in turn, Wallace had some rather interesting remarks about all the Nazis she met. Wallace wrote that Goebbels was, quote, the club-footed mastermind of the Nazi propaganda mills. She said, he impressed me as the cleverest of the lot, a tiny, wispy gnome with an enormous skull. His wife was the prettiest woman I saw in Germany, a blonde, with enormous blue eyes and a flair for clothes. Seen together, they reminded me of Beauty and the Beast. I mean, it's probably a fairly apt statement, but she goes on to say a lot of sort of scathing things about the Nazis, and it's very interesting because up until this point, we've sort of pegged Wallace Simpson as a person who is overly enchanted by power, but it seems almost as though now that she's in such proximity and over here breathing the rare air, she's almost disdainful of the whole thing. It's like now that she's gotten there, now that she's actually rubbing elbows with these people whom she's sort of always fantasized about it, and now she's like too cool for school. Oh, Goebbels, you know. Well, he's just that club-footed propagandist, you know. His wife is just gorgeous. Who even knows how she managed that one? But, I mean, you know, they're all just so dull. If I had to pick one who was the smartest, it was probably him. But, you know. Oh, what a dim little lot they all were. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, we all know she wanted to be there. She was clawing her way to get there. And now that she's there, it's just like, oh, yawn. Oh, Goebbels, that little gnome. Yes, that large-skulled, club-footed gnome. Oh, who even knows how he manages? You know, it's just like, all right, Wallace, shut it down. All right, to continue on, it just gets more and more exciting. On October 13th, the Windsors visited the Pomeranian Training School of Hitler's bodyguard, the elite SS Death's Head, or the SS Totenkopf. Here, the Duke was seen to give the Nazi salute. Dudley Forwood later described the gesture as merely good manners. All right, let's have a little chat about the good manners of the Nazi salute, shall we? Okay. I feel like the first death blow to logic is to coexist with evil and to sort of neuter outrage by explaining that nobody meant anything by it. I mean, the Nazi salute, I mean, really, you just do it, you know? It's just, very casual, yes, he did it, but I mean, you just got to give these sort of token gestures to keep everything on an even keel, What would have happened if he didn't give the salute? He just wasn't willing to risk that kind of situation. So it was all out of good manners. Good manners. I mean, here's the thing. It's not like suddenly he was going to wake up out of a stupor and be like, what the hell am I doing here? A Nazi salute, absolutely, I draw the line. I mean, of course he was the sort that would have given the Nazi salute, especially since he was there. He wasn't going to suddenly decide to, get some gumption and grow a backbone and decide that he was morally opposed to all that was happening. Clearly he was not morally opposed. But the fact that he would be excused as, oh, he just did it because it was good manners. No, he did it because he believed that where he was a good place. You know, it's not good manners. He shouldn't have even been there, you know? He did it. He was there because he believed in what it was he was seeing. Good manners, nothing. You know, it's not like he just stumbled up on a couple of Nazis and, like, in order to save his life, he had to give the salute. But, you know, he cringed at the very thought of being in their presence and having anything to do with them. Hardly. You know, so I don't know what Dudley Forwood's even talking about. Who even is he? I still can't remember who he is. I think maybe he was some kind of a journalist. Anyway, after lunch, there was an aerial inspection of a Nazi youth camp along the shores of the Baltic Sea while Wallace toured the former imperial palaces at Potsdam. It's all just so thrilling. They went and saw some Berlin museums, and then Göring decided to have everyone over to his place, and he awaited his guests with 2 rows of huntsmen behind him to play a fanfare on their hunting horns. The show is just outrageous in its insistence. You know what I mean? It's like, what even is this? Anyway, Wallace was all continuing on in her sort of like, just her mockery of the whole thing. You know, her just like, she's just so bemused by it all. So proud of herself for finding herself there, but so insistent on being unimpressed by it all. Wallace was amused how Göring, in an immaculate white uniform, metal ribbons emblazoned across the tunic, took pleasure in giving a tour of his home. And honestly, this sounds pretty hilarious because he was over there showing off his Rembrandts. He had a really, I guess, for the time, a impressive gym in which he had a lot of weightlifting equipment that I would say he probably was not using. He also wanted to show his Elizabeth Arden massage machine in which he forced his generously proportioned body between one of the pairs of rollers. I mean, can you imagine, like, your host wants to show you his house and he's over there, like, showing you his weights and, like, rolling himself around in this body roller? It's like, it would be funny. I'm not saying she couldn't be amused. But the thing is that she wanted to be with these people. So I feel like she doesn't even really get a chance to mock them because I'm like, yeah, but you wanted to be there. So you don't get to now be all like, it was so weird when he decided to step into that Elizabeth Arden massage machine and was like rolling his body around between the rollers and his fat flab was bouncing and hopping. I mean, what? That was just so weird. Okay, but all right. But it did continue to get even more and more sort of like, the greatest mockumentary of all time could be made out of this whole thing, because at one point he decided to show them all the playroom that was provided for the children of friends and relations who came by. And as it turned out, he seemed to probably be the one who spent the most time in there. Göring showed them the most, she says, he showed us the most elaborate toy railway I have ever seen. Yards and yards of intricately connected tracks, dozens of switches, coal tipples, charming little stations, and a number of locomotives and cars of different sorts. The field marshal, kneeling down in his white uniform, showed us how it worked. The deftness with which he directed the trains up and down the tracks, opening and closing switches, blowing whistles, and averting collisions suggested that he might have spent a good part of his time in the attic. I mean, so it's just hilarious how excited he is about this train set and how very obvious it was that he was spending all his time up there playing with the trains. There was also these other toys that he had, a wire-controlled model plane that could drop wooden bombs. And in the playroom, the Duke was shocked to see that on the wall was a map and Austria had already been colored in to show that it was part of Germany. And the book said he was shocked, but I'm like, were you though? Really? I mean, what? Can you even imagine a world in which Germany would not have thought that Austria was theirs? It's wild to me that he wouldn't have assumed that that would have been like the first country they'd have their eyes on. So shocked, I mean, and this is where I kind of waffle back and forth because there's a part of me that goes, okay, David was not an idiot in the sense that he knew what was going on with Nazi Germany. He was having conversations with his cousin. He was having secret meetings with Ribbentrop. He wanted to be kept abreast of things back when he was king. So you know that he wasn't a total idiot. It says in the last chapter that he knew what he at least knew that there were some questionable things going on with the Jews and other arrangements that I don't think he was getting too much information on. I mean, he knew about it, but he was like selecting what he heard, so he didn't have to be sort of approached too much with the nitty-gritty of it all. And yet he told others that he was shocked that the map was including Austria in Germany. It's like, well, were you stupid or were you really naively involved with the Nazis? I tend to think he was just stupid. I think he looked at the Nazis and saw, like I said the last episode, I think he looked at people who were very good at pomp and ceremony. I think he looked at them and thought, they've got something going on with this dictatorship. I really admire the fact that one man could change the course of this whole political system. And I think that he looked at that and he wanted whatever that was, at whatever cost it came, like he'd worry about that tomorrow, fiddly dee. But how could he possibly be shocked by the map? Unless he's an idiot. And so, yet one more piece falls into the puzzle. This guy was just not sharp. He was very, very dumb. Which reminds me, once again, of Harry. And you know I don't like to call people dumb. I've said that a million times. But if people are acting dumb, sometimes there's only one word for it. You know? All right. Well, anyway, they continue on with their many, many tours of all the dullest things you could possibly show somebody in Germany. I mean, imagine going to Germany and spending your time in a coal mine. But that's what they did. And then they went to some industrial works and garden settlements. And then they concluded with a visit to the Krupp's armaments factory. Now, this is very interesting. One time, they went and toured a miners' hospital. And then right after that, they actually went to a concentration camp where, Forward later recalled, we saw this enormous concrete building, which, of course, I know now contained inmates. And the Duke said, "What's over there?" And they said, "Oh, that's where we keep all the cold meat." Really? Okay. And the Duke just ate it up. Okay. I mean, you've got to have a huge building. How much meat are you people consuming? How much sausage is being made over there? You know, it's like you need an entire barracks for the cold meat. Okay. The tour was not enhanced by the antics of the boorish drunken Lay, who was relieved of his duties halfway through the trip. Remember, this is the guy who met them at the station when they first came to Berlin. And this was the guy that I said was a hot mess and everyone knew it. This footnote says here, rarely sober, with a penchant for underage girls, Lay committed... he deleted himself. Weissel awaiting trial in Nuremberg for war crimes. And his wife, 26 years his junior, also ended it all in 1942 because of his brutal treatment of her. So this was the bottom of the barrel as far as who could be escorting you on your many journeys, which just is like... goes to show you how little the Nazis looked at David and Wallace Simpson as a couple of people they were hoping to impress. They couldn't care less. And, you know, there's going to be a couple of other things, too, that it's like, whoa. I mean, slap in the face, slap in the face, slap in the face. And this was really, truly the first evidence that nobody really cared how this trip went one way or the other. You know, it's just like, okay, you guys want to come over? We'll show you around. You know, we'll have a couple of dinners for you guys, and you know, you can meet some important people for a couple of minutes. But they were not interested in making this a high class, high caliber event. Anyway, Lay was relieved halfway. Even at a certain point, they're like, all right, this guy's he's kind of embarrassing us at this point. We'll put somebody else on. Wallace described him as, if not actually not alcoholic, a noisy chronic drinker. And like I said earlier, he was partial to schnapps, which he was sneaking throughout the day, all day long. She wrote that he had bright eyes, a florid complexion, a squat bear-like build. And, she said, to my American eyes, he was a four-flusher. that means that he was a braggart. I'd never heard that term before, but that's what it means. So she thought he was just braggy and just a drunk, basically. Can you even imagine having to spend all day with this person who's constantly throwing the schnapps down his throat? And it gets worse. She said that he was a horrific driver, that he took particular pleasure in driving extremely fast, and that Wallace was, and these are her words, afraid of being blown out of the back seat. While all the while, above the roar of the wind, a radio blared out German tunes to which Dr. Lay kept time by rolling his head from side to side. The picture is just hilarious. Here's this guy tipping the schnapps back, roaring around the curves, hair blown back, just bopping to his German tunes. It's just... What a mental picture. I love it. All right. Well, remember how I said that Lay, being the one who showed up to sort of take care of them, was the first slap in the face? Well, the slaps continued when they went to go meet Hitler. If he had hung a banner outside of his home that said, "You don't matter to me," it couldn't have been more evident through his behavior. They finally, come to the crescendo of the visit. They're going to go meet Hitler himself. And they show up at his house. This was all very carefully orchestrated, okay? Let us remember about the kind of schedules that the Nazis kept. Think about the way they kept those trains running on time, right? Like nothing escaped their ability to organize. So this trip, even though it was headed by the, Mr. Catastrophe himself, Dr. Lay, when it comes to Hitler's schedule and who he's seeing, things would have been very neatly organized. They bring the Prince of Wales and his wife to go and meet Hitler. And a special train took them to Hitler's mountain. And arriving early, they were made to wait while the Fuhrer had his nap. But eventually, the meeting began at 2:30 p.m. As though they don't know when Hitler's nap is going to be, the people who are in charge of this knew exactly when he took his nap. They knew exactly when they should be bringing guests to his house. They did it on purpose to show Wallace Simpson and her husband, we don't care about you. Hitler doesn't care about you. He doesn't need you. Okay, you can wait for him. And it's just astounding because, here we have the former King of England just sort of sitting outside, twiddling his thumbs, waiting for Hitler to stumble out of his bedroom and have some tea. It's very embarrassing, very sloppy, but it gets worse because David spoke fluent German. He had, for years of his life, he'd spoken German, remember he spent every summer there before World War I, and he had all those German relatives and very, very knit to his German identity. So it isn't as though he needed an interpreter. But even though David spoke German, Hitler insisted on using an interpreter named Paul Schmidt. What a slap in the face. Pete, you know what I'm saying? David didn't need an interpreter, but Hitler wanted to keep that distance between the two of them. I won't speak to you. We'll speak through an interpreter. Doesn't matter that you can understand me and I can understand you. Not going to do it. We'll speak through my interpreter. Do you know? It's incredibly rude. And if I were David, would have been offended. Like, I can speak to you, but sorry, no. Wallace was taken off by Eva Braun and Rudolf Hess, who talked to her about music, which he loved. Meanwhile, the detective Philip Atfield was left to his own devices, although with a Gestapo man right there at his elbow the whole time, so he didn't find out anything interesting. Reporting the visit, and I find this very interesting. Reporting the visit, the New York Times noted that the Duchess was visibly impressed with the Fuhrer's personality, and he apparently indicated that they had become fast friends by giving her an affectionate farewell. He took both their hands in his, saying a long goodbye, after which he stiffened to a rigid Nazi salute. That the Duke returned. Horrific. All of it's horrific. None of this limp-wristed, Heil Hitler for David. The whole thing is just distasteful to the extreme. Now, the author says that Wallace, who had always been drawn to powerful men, wrote And it would appear that the author believes that they were flattering words of Hitler. I don't think these sound flattering at all, but you tell me what you think. Wallace, always drawn to powerful men, later wrote of Hitler's, quote, pasty pallor, and under his mustache his lips were fixed in a kind of mirthless grimace. His eyes were truly extraordinary, intense, unblinking, magnetic. And then he says that Forwood was more direct. He remembered Hitler as, quote, a funny little man sitting beside the Duke. He didn't impress me as being a great person. I believe Forwood must have been the journalist that wrote for the New York Times. I don't think that what she was saying was any really difference from what Forwood was saying. I think she was just more descriptive about it. He sounds frightening. A pasty man with a grimace under his mustache, whose eyes were intense, unblinking, and magnetic. I mean, I would be terrified to be around somebody who's just, I mean, can you imagine? How horrific. This is the thing I don't understand. Now all of us know that Hitler was a maniac, a demonic and possessed maniac. And there is not one person that you could find walking the globe whose faculties are intact, who is not repulsed by the man. But I don't think you have to live post-Holocaust to have been repulsed by him. I cannot even believe that there was anybody who looked him in the face and was like, you're a person I can take seriously. Screaming like a maniac with his dumb, comedian's mustache, the whole like Charlie Chaplin foolishness. I mean, what even was that? Like, I would just be like, dude, you're taking your cues off of slapstick comedy, somebody who fell down on banana peels. This is who you want to impersonate in life? And you want me to take you seriously? Like, I just don't feel like I would have had to know that he was running trains, into death camps full of human beings to be like, something's wrong with that guy. Something's wrong with a guy who's going to stand at a podium and scream until he's almost got no voice left. And think that we should all take him seriously, where he has literally found his identity by copying the facial hair of a slapstick comedian. I mean, it's just like, what? All right. Anyway, he sounds like both descriptions are so unflattering, Wallace's and Forwood's. I just can't even believe that there were people who gave him the time of day, but whatever. Okay. The book goes on to say that there isn't any record that exists of what the Duke and Hitler talked about. Paul Getty, a friend of Windsor, said that maybe someday, and he wouldn't be surprised, some musty eyes only file would be fished out of top security vault and maybe some new light could be thrown on the episode. But as far as he knew, nobody knew anything about it. And I think maybe what we can surmise is really just that, Hitler probably did a lot of talking about, you'll be king when I take over England. I'll make all things right for you. And, probably some things like that, or maybe not even anything that deep. Maybe they just sort of mused about, this, that, and the other. Maybe they talked about music or art or whatever, Maybe they didn't even talk about anything serious, because I don't think that Hitler really took David very seriously. Obviously, he invited him over and then made him wait until he got up out of his nap and then wouldn't even speak to him outside of an interpreter, even though they could have communicated. So I just really have my doubts that it was anything all that deep. I think that he would have, what I really think? I bet Hitler didn't say anything to him that would have given David any kind of hope, because I think that he would have wanted to show David, I don't need you, I think that if he had said anything to David about wanting to, maybe one day he and David could work together in some capacity, then David would have felt some kind of importance. I think that Hitler wanted him to feel like, you're not important to me. I don't need you. I let you come to my country, and I, threw you a bone by giving you a couple of people who could hang out with you. But other than that, thanks for coming. I feel like that's the vibe here. I could be wrong. Now, the only ostensible drama of the visit, recounted by Duke's detective Atfield, was when, quote, an English woman school teacher got through the guards. Apparently she'd been following the group for 10 days, and she tried to give the Duke a hug, but, she was caught and taken away. So really nothing interesting happened. They went and saw a bunch of boring places. They hung out with Hitler. He made it clear he didn't really care about them. And then that was that. The Duke was, however, very impressed by what he'd seen. And he wrote, and this just blows me away, "I've traveled the world, and my upbringing has made me familiar with the great achievements of mankind. But that which I have seen in Germany, I had hitherto believed to be impossible. It cannot be grasped, and it is a miracle. One can only begin to understand it when one realizes that behind it all is one man and one will." What was he marveling at? What was it that he'd seen that just, rocked him in his little shoes? I don't understand it. And this last line makes little to no sense. I can't even begin to understand this miracle, except then suddenly I realize that all of this has managed to happen, and that it's all because of one man and his will. That doesn't make that makes it less understandable. How has one man managed to do all this? And how has his will seemed to govern everybody? And why is everybody following what that little mustachioed man has to say? Somebody make it make sense. But I think that he looked at Hitler, like I said last time, and thought, oh, there's the blueprint, but I could do it better. After this grim visit, the Windsors returned to Paris on October 24th. For all the concerns in British government circles, their visit to Nazi Germany had made little impact. Nigel Law, who'd been in Germany on business, reported his impressions to the Foreign Office. He said, and this is really depressing, "The visit of the Duke of Windsor seems to have made a bad impression. His entire journey and expenses were paid by the German Labor Front. He was always with Dr. Ley, who was invariably drunk and is of a second-rate importance among the Nazis. He saw very little of the real leaders, and he spent but a short time with the Fuhrer. Even the bill for the manicure of his secretary was paid by Dr. Ley, and no tips were given at the Kaiserhof, where he stayed. Germans say he did not understand half of what he saw or what was said to him, and the whole visit is described as lacking in dignity for one who held such a great position." Well, really, it was exactly all it could have been. Pathetic. I mean, it's pathetic that David would scurry over to Germany and ask that little tyrant's opinion of anything. Here he was, the King of England, and even if he's not the King of England now, to deign to visit with this absolute detestable dictator and even talk to him about anything and even get his opinion about anything and hobnob with all those fat cats in their sorry suits and their silly medals who wanted to run them around the house to show them the playroom and roll their fat between the rollers of their Elizabeth Arden massaging machine. This was what he wanted to do with his time? He'd been the king. It just is wild that he would want to spend his time this way, and that he wouldn't see it as completely beneath his dignity to do so. What a pathetic situation.